Good afternoon. My name is Danette Roth, and I am here to discuss with you Anthony and his a concern or a need I saw in regard to prompting with the activities, both academically and in regard to procedures, uh, with Anthony getting throughout the day. A formal assessment was administered on him, the Adaptive Behavior Assessment System. And one of the concerns from that assessment were the prompting that Anthony needed to complete most classroom tasks, um, like taking off his backpack in the morning, starting and completing work, lining up, etc. And prompting is required of Anthony in both adaptive skills, social skills, and in the area of academics. And I felt that that was a need that we could address in regard to Anthony. And so I suggested performing an informal assessment, specifically an event sampling. I wanted to perform or administer an event sampling on Anthony um, during a reading activity and during a math activity. Um, it included an observation that would help us understand why Anthony um, needed the prompting to complete an activity, hopefully to identify um, what occurred before that may require prompting and what his response was after. And that might allow us to determine a way to reduce the amount of prompting um, with either a reinforcer or a consequence. I asked his special education teacher if I could return to administer the event sampling, and she concurred. So we had planned for an observation during a math and reading assignment. The first event sampling um, I administered was during a reading assignment, which was done on a Monday morning. And during that assignment, the teacher they were to read a chapter, and upon conclusion of that reading, they would answer some questions orally, and then to continue to check for understanding, they would answer comprehension questions from worksheets. And on those worksheets, there were approximately 5 multiple choice questions per page, so nothing daunting for the student. And the teacher informed me this is something they have done since the beginning of the school year. So they typically will read a chapter or two a week with these comprehension questions. So it's a procedure or routine that Anthony is very familiar with. And so when I returned and I observed, the first time that he required prompting was at 9 o'clock, which was at the beginning of the lesson. He required 3 prompts. At that time, he was sitting at the table, and after the third prompt, he did open his book. There was no reinforcement or consequence offered at that time, and simply the teacher just asked Anthony to open his book to begin the lesson. But she had to ask him 3 times while he sat there. At 9:10, as the students were reading, another teacher walked into the classroom to begin a load of laundry, and that distraction stopped Anthony from his focus on the assignment, and the teacher had to give him 4 prompts. And the distraction caused him to not stay on task until the other teacher left the room, and his special education teacher then had to go take a blanket and cover the washing machine so that he could not see the spinning, because he couldn't remove himself from the washing machine and return back to the classroom to regain focus on their assignment. Again, she did. I guess the consequence would have been that she had to cover the washing machine so that he could not see it. But the reading was interrupted by the other teacher entering the classroom. Anthony Jr. was able to stay on task for another 10 minutes, and at 9:20, he became distracted again, but that was when the reading was complete And so it's like they were transitioning to the next piece of the assignment. Um, and the teacher was asking all the students questions. When it came to Anthony's turn, she had to give him two choices, and he was the last one to answer, so the other five students had answered their question. Some of them were able to initiate a response, but with Anthony, the teacher had to give him a choice, so that he would be participating in the discussion. Um, the reinforcer was after he answered his question, the teacher praised him for answering and like, oh, thank you, Anthony, for answering that question. That was a really good response. And then he was able, she asked him to go back to his seat so they could complete the last part of the assignment with the worksheets. And he did get his papers out. But 5 minutes later at 9:25, with the worksheet out, it took 4 prompts for him to get back on task. He just sat on his hands. The teacher finally asked him if he wanted the timer. He said yes, and she told him if he completed the first 5 questions, he would get a break with the timer. So he completed the first 5 questions. He was given the timer as the reinforcer. And then once the timer went off, he set it down, and they were able to complete the rest of the assignment. So that was the first observation that I had with him in regards to the prompting. He struggled at the beginning of the assignment, but then he was able to get going. And then when he got distracted, it took a while for him to get going. And then when they transitioned to the next part, it took him a while to get going. So basically, anytime there's a transition or at the beginning of assignment, or at least in reading at this point, he has trouble getting on task and focused. So there's a lot of reprompting required at that time. The next event sampling I did was during a math assignment. In the math assignment, the teacher had, it was a 2-part math assignment. The first part, the students were all working together on a coin page where they had to count the money. And the first page, there were only 3 problems per page. The first page had coins. They counted the coins, and then they had to determine if there was an item that they could purchase for that specific amount. The second worksheet was along the same ideas. They had to count coins. They were given an amount. Did they have enough money to buy an item that was labeled with an amount? And then the final page was they were given an amount, or they had to count the money. They figured out an amount, and then they had to determine if they were given a specific item. Did the money that they have, the coins that they have counted, did they have enough money to purchase that item that they were given? And so at the beginning of the lesson, Anthony needed 4 prompts. He sat on his hands. The teacher reinforced him with the timer if he completed the task. The other students were doing the task. That was at 12:30. At 12:35, he still hadn't started the lesson. The teacher had to give him 4 more prompts. He continued to sit on his hands. At that point, she said there would be a consequence if he did not begin the task. He would be moved away from the other students. He then picked up his pencil and began the task. All other students were still working. 5 minutes later, at 12:40, he had set down his pencil. The teacher had to give him 1 prompt. He began to sit on his hands. This time, the teacher said that, asked him if he wanted to be moved away from his friends. He responded no. And then the teacher said, well, then you need to pick up your pencil. Anthony just kind of looked at her, so she began to tape stacks toward him, and at that point he picked up his pencil and completed the assignment. And during that time, the other students were completing their task. As with the reading assignment, it took Anthony about 10 minutes to begin the assignment, but without any distractions. He was able to complete it. So once again, even in regards to math, it takes him a while to get going, but once he gets going, especially with math, like in math, he probably worked for about 15-20 minutes before he set his pencil again. Once he got going, he was he was with it. I don't know if it was because it was numbers or if he just knew, like he just got into a groove and he started working. Um, but for both samplings, I observed Anthony in his natural setting and determined that he need most of his prompting to become motivated to begin the activity, and that if he became distracted, he was having to begin that activity again. So he was still struggling during the beginning of an activity. But um, once he began it, he was able to complete it independently. The teacher is familiar with reinforcers and consequences that work for him. The reinforcers that work with Anthony are anything to do with numbers, a clock, a calculator, a money game, a timer, and being able to sit next to a friend. Consequences at work are moving him away from the group or moving that friend away from him. Um, on occasion, I would hear the teacher remind him that if he didn't participate now, he would not have his free time. He'd be working during his free time. Some recommendations I have for Anthony to maybe minimize the amount of prompting that he needs to begin a task um, is to pair him with that friend, especially during reading, and having that friend kind of initiate. But I think if that friend is with him and the friend is willing to do it, I think that's enough motivation to get Anthony um, focused and on task immediately. The next recommendation I have is to minimize the distractions in the classroom. I'm wondering if the teacher can lock her door or just have a discussion with teachers and say, hey, during this time, can you please not come into my classroom to do laundry? I have this student and he has a difficult time beginning an activity if he's distracted. The final recommendation I would offer would before she even begins an activity or a task or an assignment, offer him a reward and say, hey, Anthony, if we can get started right away, I'll let you have the timer or the clock or the money game or the calculator, whatever is working for him that day. And maybe she can get him engaged earlier in the activity. Do you have any questions for me? Thank you.